Welcome to the second episode of Mortar, the building blocks of 21st century learning.
Today we're going to talk about PBL, which is project-based learning.
So we're not talking about peanut butter and jelly?
No, there will be no peanut butter jelly time.
Oh, okay. So we're talking about then the 8 essentials in project-based learning.
8.
Yes, there are 8. Did you know the first one is significant content?
Yeah.
Yeah. So significant content would be maybe introducing a project to your students that is meaningful, that would have educational purpose, and would include all of the objectives or core standards that you would want your students to be able to have knowledge of whenever the project is finished.
Yeah, and secondly, they need to establish a need to know. That's the second element. And the teacher needs to give something compelling that will drive the project. And students should walk away saying, I need to know this to meet the challenge I've accepted.
So could that include something, maybe let's say what we used to include in our lessons, which would have been anticipatory set? Is there some kind of an entry event that would get the students motivated or, get them really excited about the learning that was going to take place?
Yeah, you need to hook the students, so a lot of times that's done through the driving question.
Oh, okay. So the driving question could actually state the purpose for the learning, and could it also be a question that's abstract, concrete, or maybe even focusing on just solving one problem?
Yeah, I think so. Another element that the project-based learning encompasses is student voice and choice. Students and learners actively participate in a project-based learning environment, and they have choices as to part of what will be presented. They could be choosing on the types of presentations or products they're creating, and that way it gives them some buy-in and ownership into the process as well.
Mm-hmm. That does make sense, because the more choices and voice that they have in their projects, the more meaningful it is going to be to them. And then what about 21st century skills? I think that is another important part of project-based learning that you're throwing in there: the collaboration, the communication, the critical thinking, the creativity, and then just the use of technology, which makes things more authentic and things that they're going to be doing outside of their educational career.
Yeah, the types of technology that we're seeing in the 21st century have changed the way we work. And so for kids to be prepared for the marketplace, for the workplace that they will enter upon graduation, they need to have a little bit different set of skills than, let's say, people in the 1980s and 1990s had to have.
Mm-hmm. Those really kind of flow together rather nicely and make for a great project. What about inquiry and innovation? How do those play into project-based learning?
Well, in real inquiry, students follow a trail that begins with their own questions, and that leads them to search for resources and discovery of answers, and ultimately take them to generating new questions and testing out ideas and drawing upon those conclusions.
Mm-hmm.
And that inquiry should ultimately lead them to answering that driving question.
So would you say then that the driving question, is there a black and white answer to that driving question? Or is it more used toward having the students generate more questions based on that driving question?
Well, generally, a driving question is going to be open-ended. It's not going to be a black and white yes or no type of question, and hopefully it does generate more questions, and that's part of getting students to participate in the learning process as well, as they generate more questions about the topic.
So that kind of brings us to number 7, which is, feedback and revision during a project. I know sometimes students want to make their first draft their final draft, but we need to instill in the students that, for it to be high quality work, that there are going to be constant revisions and constant feedback, hopefully from peers and from teachers. And then ultimately, a great project-based learning project is going to have feedback from other people from outside their school. It goes beyond the teacher. is what I'm
Yeah,
trying to
and
say, I guess.
it really reminds me of the adage, practice makes perfect. And to develop professional work and products, there's no way to avoid going through a rigorous process of revision. You always have to critique yourself, have others critique it, and then gradually tweak that work to where it becomes a professional quality.
Yeah.
Well, the last element is another piece of student buy-in, really, and that is it has to do with publicly presenting the product. So at the end, the students aren't necessarily doing this project to take a test in the end, which is somewhat artificial, and they're not even doing it to satisfy the teacher as their audience. Ideally, in a project-based learning environment, you'll have an authentic audience, one that the project has to do with. And really the only way to understand this piece is to see it in action. So in our next segment, we're going to bring in Mr. Jeff Lofting, who works largely with Franklin Technical Center and a project called Project Wi-Fi Hotspot. And that'll be in our next segment.
When I think of shootings from schools or from the movie theater, I think that sometimes people forget that it doesn't matter where you're at or what facility you are entering, that something like that can happen anywhere. But I think it's a facility's job to try their best to prevent something like that from happening and make sure it's a safe environment.
We work real hard on emergency procedures like evacuation drills, lockdown drills, those sorts of things, and make sure that our staff are well trained.
We have tornado drills, we have fire drills, and we have lockdown drills. And during those lockdown drills, we find a place in the room, a secure place that we feel like would be the best place should something happen, should somebody come in with a weapon. And then we obviously lock the doors.
Students come up to me and tell me, hey, I'm glad you're here. And staff also, they say they feel safe. Just because of the presence.
There's always an officer here. I never have had a doubt that we wouldn't be safe.
Overall, our school is pretty safe. We have locks on all the doors. They're locked through the daytime. We have guards. We have school police officers here, and I think for the most part, Joplin High School is doing a good job at keeping us safe.
The occurrence of all of these tragedies has caused us here at Joplin High School to really research on how safe our schools actually are and how the students have reacted to such tragedies.
I think that my friends and I, like in light of recent events, we've kind of talked about things that happened at Sandy Hook, and it's just a subject that I think we can all relate to just because we're all kids and we all attend school.
Though there have been many recent tragedies, the students and staff feel reassured of their safety here at Joplin High School. I'm Joshua Hudson.
And I'm Shelby Haas.
And welcome back to Mortar. And now we have with us Jeff Lofting.
Hello. Hi, Jeff.
Hi.
You want to give us kind of we've been talking about project-based learning. Would you like to give us kind of an overview of what you're doing over at Franklin Technical Center?
Yeah, sure thing. The 21st Century Learning coaches over the last summer, went to a conference called PBL World, which is put on by Buck Institute of Education. And we learned a little bit more about project-based learning, specifically about the structure and the process used in order to take teachers through the development of project-based lessons. This year, I've been trying to educate some teachers about that, start with certain teachers, and I found two teachers that were incredibly receptive, and in a large part were really doing the elements within their lessons and their classes that are essential within a project-based lesson. Those two teachers were Mark Terrell, who is an instructor for HVAC at FTC, and Stephen Bradfield, who teaches networking at FTC as well. Stephen Bradfield was really wanting to provide a real-world experience for his students in networking, and so we talked about kind of the emerging technology of Wi-Fi within networking, and a lot of professionals, especially in this area, focus largely on wired Ethernet type of networking. Well, he was wanting to expand out into wireless and get his students exposed to that type of technology. So that's one of the first projects that we started. Another teacher, Mark Terrell, was also wanting to focus on some renewable energy with his students, and so we decided to focus on helping a nonprofit organization develop a renewable, sustainable, and affordable solution to HVAC within that nonprofit organization. So,
Which are all real world
yeah,
related things, projects
Right.
that will help with PPL.
right, very much so.
So right away, the kids know at the end of this, they already have that piece in place of a public audience, and they know that what they're developing and what they're working toward really has a true impact. It's not something artificial.
Right, exactly, yeah. So what we did is we developed driving questions for each of those project-based lessons. For Mr. Bradfield's class, it was how do we develop a Wi-Fi hotspot solution for a small business that's affordable, that's sustainable, and that's scalable as that business grows. A lot of small businesses have trouble with the technology. They just don't have the expertise, and they don't want to spend the resources in order to develop that. And so it's just not even a thought. And so they're missing out on that market of customers. And so, the students within this project are starting out, first of all, the need to know is how do we provide that as a small business owner. So when we get out of FTC, if we've decided to start our own small business, how do we meet that market within our community in order to provide that for the community? So they have started out with researching. There's 5 phases that we're taking the students through. The first one is the need to know. So they're researching, first of all, how can a Wi-Fi hotspot benefit a small business? And that was a long phase that they went through.
So where are they doing their researching at? Are they talking to professionals outside the school? Are they just surfing the web? Where are they getting those resources?
Yeah, great question. It's a lot of it is started out on the internet, but just recently we had a business owner from Frontenac, Kansas, and would have never imagined that this type of business would be there, but it's called Whispernet Routers, and it's owned by a gentleman by the name of Aya Gustafson, who provides Wi-Fi hotspots for large businesses. And so just the other day we had him come in during a 2.5, 3-hour session and speak to all of the networking students and provide some of that information from his perspective. But a large part of it was inquiry-based on the students' part. They were divided up into teams, into groups, with 4 different roles. The first one was a project manager that was responsible for making sure that there was progress being made within the project. Kind of delegating, responsible for delegating and leading the delegation of tasks. The second role was a researcher who is in charge of making sure the research gets done in an effective, efficient way. They don't do all the research, but they're in charge of making sure that happens. Then we have a developer, a student who is going through a website called Code Academy. It is a tutorial-based website that teaches students HTML, CSS, so that they can eventually develop what's called an authentication page. That's what you see like at Starbucks or Panera whenever you go on there, terms of use and all that. And then there's a marketer who is in charge of coming up with ways to help offset the cost for the initial investment of a Wi-Fi hotspot. So
if I'm understanding you correctly, that would satisfy the piece of being student voice and choice. They have some choices in terms of how they piece this together and the roles they play within their group.
That's exactly right. Yeah, the voice and choice is a very important element. A lot of times as teachers, we do want to hold on to that control of especially the final product. And so giving the students voice and choice, though, even though it's a little bit more challenging and subjective in certain ways, that really does get them excited that they can come up with their own solutions. And when it comes to the presentation time and the reflection and revision time, then that's the time where peers can step in, the teacher can step in, a community member can step in and say, hey, have you thought about this? Maybe you need to adjust this a little bit. But yeah, that's a very important piece of it. Yeah.
So then as far as the revision or the feedback from outside the school, how are you going to be handling that within those 2 projects that you're working with?
So the first phase being the need to know, how does this benefit a business? The second phase is the hotspot options. So they are researching ways to actually create something that is affordable, something that is scalable, and then they're going to make a choice from, let's say, 3 options that they come up with. As a team, they're going to make a choice. This is the best option, and this is the one that we want to present to a business. Then they justify it. Why did I choose this option? That's the 4th phase. Why did I choose this option over another option? And from there, they're going to present the proposal to a community member, which will start out being their peers. Then it will go to probably building administration, and then thirdly to some small business owners that may possibly be interested. And then here's where the competition comes in, which really gets students excited. The small business owners are going to decide which proposal they would actually accept and then provide more feedback to them. But before that happens, that's a little bit stressful for certain students, but before that happens, that revision and reflection component is very important. One thing I wanted to mention with the PBL World conference that we went to, it was put on by Buck Institute for Education, BIE.org, and they provided a lot of structure for coaches, instructional leaders within the school to go through in developing these project-based lessons. And that's what Mr. Bradfield and I did. We were able to step-by-step develop this, but they also provided resources for revision and reflection, such as it's called a critical friends analysis. And it's structured, it's step-by-step, how students in a very polite and professional way state what their plan is, and then you go to the second step of that critical friends analysis, and the peers provide feedback, and then they respond. It's very structured, and that's why
It's kind of like a rubric type format.
Yes, right. And BIE.org on the website, free of charge, they provide a lot of rubrics and guidance actually.
And I think going forward, that'll be obviously a question. You're dealing in an atmosphere where it's a technical center, so some of those situations probably lend themselves to getting outside the 4 walls of the building at Franklin Tech. How do you see this going forward with other teachers that are teaching more core curriculum and ways that they could implement PBL?
Yeah, I think it's challenging for a teacher in a core subject to think that you can do something like this. But the most important part of that is, first of all, for teachers to see something successful happening within Joplin High School. And that's what we hope to present to other teachers and show them this is possible, that students can get engaged in this type of project, and the benefits that are reaped from this type of project are significant.
Well, it's giving them those life skills that they need for after their school career.
And also convincing these core teachers that significant content is a major component of this. So we're not just focusing on technology, we're not focusing on just the 21st century skills, but we're also focusing on that significant content. The most important part of that for teachers, though, is developing that driving question, a problem-based scenario that then will cover a lot of content, a lot of skills within this project. And that's one thing, it's one major point about project-based learning, is that the project is not the dessert, it's the main course. So you're not teaching the content, teaching the skills, and then you have the project and assess it that way. It's actually all-encompassing. So you teach the content, you teach the skills within that project. And that's one of the paradigm shifts that a lot of teachers, I think, will have to make. And it does take a lot of time and a lot of planning, but the resources that are provided by BIE.org are great, and they've really helped us to go through that process.
Well, and it sounds like the benefits are mutual. I mean, both community members are going to benefit from interacting with school in situations where we're providing them with some research and development, and then the students are gaining something extremely valuable in the school environment that they might ordinarily not get until they're actually in the field somewhere.
Right.
So I see it as being mutually beneficial.
Definitely.
Well, it sounds like it's a very exciting and very worthwhile educational project that they are implementing there at Franklin Tech. And we appreciate you spending time with us and telling us more about what you guys are doing over there with project-based learning. If there are other teachers that want to know more or get involved with project-based learning, they could get in touch with our 21st Century Learning coach.
Or what about community members that might have an idea as to a project they could get involved with the school?
Sure, yeah. They can, first of all, visit BIE.org. Again, a great resource website. They can also visit projectwifihotspot.weebly.com. So project, W-I-F-I, hotspot.weebly.com. They can go over and look at the actual project that we're doing. And then if they are interested in contacting 21st Century Learning Coach or somebody within the district, they can just email 21CLC at joplinschools.org, and that will contact all of the 21st Century Learning Coaches.
Okay. Well, once again, we appreciate you taking your time and talking to us about PBL, and it's exciting where education is going and what we can do.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
This has been Mortar.
Yeah. Thank you for watching.